In 1942, the United States suffered a farm work labor shortage since most of their men were aiding in World War II efforts. This motivated the United States government to create an agreement with Mexico called the Bracero Program, Bracero meaning farmhand. Mexico agreed to help the U.S. under the conditions that the braceros would be treated fairly and paid 30 cents an hour. It was the responsibility of the United States to keep their word. According to the UCLA, about 4.6 million contracts were signed and many kept on returning from 1942 to 1964. It was the largest U.S. labor contract in history. Most contracts were 3 to 4.5 months. Most braceros were sent to California and Texas. However, they were sent to other states all over the United States. The main contracting center and U.S. entrance was in El Paso, Texas. The program quickly became controversial while Mexicans were desperate for work and were willing to accept jobs for only 30 cents. American farm workers in the United States and Texas especially began to worry that they'd have to compete with braceros for jobs available at lower wages. During the first 5 years, Texas decided they wouldn't take part in the program. However, Texas farmers still benefited from this system by hiring farm workers directly from Mexico, who often entered the U.S. illegally. In 1950, the U.S. contracted about 300,000 braceros per year, which persuaded Texas to continue the program in the state after seeing how much labor was being produced. Braceros mainly worked on farms and some worked on railroads. They were often transferred to several states throughout their contract. Most braceros were sent to Mexico after their contracts were over. However, some had the opportunity to reapply. Although the United States promised humane conditions, they didn't keep their word. As a matter of fact, the racism that braceros faced in Texas was so intense that the Mexican government prohibited the use of their nationals in the fields of Texas. Most braceros lived in very small shacks, often with 6 or more men, and most of the time they didn't have a bathroom, a shower, or a clean and hygienic space. They had to use the bathroom outside and even shower with an outside hose.
Pasamos la fiesta de mi pueblo, que es en febrero, el día 2 de febrero, y en marzo, luego en marzo, hubo otra contratada, me volvió a contratar. Entonces ya me tocó en Colorado, en Trinidad, Colorado, ahí bajaron a todos. Y cada patrón, pues hablar palabras medias sucias o lo que sea. Cada ranchero agarraba sus burritos y los que necesitaba. Yo necesito tantos, y los bajaba. Y a nosotros nos tocó con uno, nomás quería 6. Ya nos llevó un ranchito, una casita como esta casa y como esta, y ahí vivieron los 6. No teníamos baño, no teníamos nada. Allí era un canal que pasaba, una regadera allí. Ahí nos revolcábamos a veces.
Another form of inhumane treatment that the braceros faced was being sprayed with DDT, which was developed as the first synthetic insecticide in the 1940s. DDT is an odorless, tasteless, and almost colorless pesticide that was used in agriculture. Although the braceros were sprayed with this liquid, the person that was in charge of spraying them was always wearing a mask or covering their face. The CDC explained how exposure to high doses of DDT in people can cause vomiting, tremors, shakiness, and seizures. It can also affect the liver and the reproduction system. And it's also a possible carcinogen. Even though it was banned in 1942, DDT takes more than 15 years to break down. So what effects did it have on the braceros that were sprayed until they were covered with this poisonous powder? Braceros were often overworked, working more than 10 hours a day most of the time. A transcribed news story from the Los Angeles Times says, A 5-month investigation of reported abuses in the Bracero Program has produced information that at least one Imperial Valley grower allegedly has falsified records. Glenn E. Brockway, Regional Director of the Labor Department's Bureau of Employment Security, reported Mexican nationals to have worked longer hours than they actually did. Farmers were falsifying records to make it seem like more labor was being created in a shorter amount of time. Braceros were often robbed of their wages. Although they were promised 30 cents an hour, farmers would often take shelter and food out of their paychecks, even though that was to be provided free of charge under the contract created by both governments. In 1954, President Eisenhower implemented Operation Wetback, a racist term used against Mexicans, and deported as many as 1.3 million Mexican and Mexican American citizens from the United States. Although most were in the United States through the Bracero Program, the operation was used to send them back, and they were often dumped in unfamiliar parts of Mexico. The Bracero Program came to an end in 1964 when the mechanization of cotton and sugar beets harvesting was created, and also when it was shown that having braceros in the U.S. decreased the wages of American farm workers whom had come back from World War II. The truth of the matter is that despite the unfair and racist treatment that the braceros faced, they were the ones that kept the country running when they needed help the most, when their American citizens were all fighting for freedom.